The house had always smelled like coffee and old cardboard. A mailbox with peeling paint. A narrow shared walkway. He'd signed the papers with trembling hands. 10 years of saving, one night of finality. This would finally be his place. 5 months later, a stranger knocked on his door. The knock was polite, businesslike. The man on the other side had a smile that belonged on a glossy estate agent card. He wanted to talk about insurance. Just a small thing, he said. The homeowner reached for the documents, expecting routine. Instead, he saw a different truth written in plain terms on an insurance certificate that didn't belong to him. A single line, straight a title. It read like a trapdoor under a life you thought was solid. What would you do if everything you saved for, everything you trusted, hung on a small mislabel on a flyer? What if the person who sold you that security shrugged and offered $1,000 to go away? He did not yell. He did not smash the glossy office sign. He waited. That knock was the beginning of a 7-year game, patient, quiet, and precise. He would not let a shrug and a denial be the last word. He'd learned to let time and small consistent pressure speak louder than a fist. This is the story of how the long game works. How small, pointed gestures, flowers, postcards, a voice from a place you once visited, can erode a man's life when the truth finally finds purchase. Music swells and drops to underscore. Cut to title card. If you love stories of patient, satisfying payback, slow, surgical, and inevitable, hit like and subscribe. Share this with someone who believes in quiet justice. Comment, would you play the long game or strike fast? Alright, let's slow down and start from the beginning. 7 years before his revenge came to full bloom, he was a single buyer with a singular dream, a place to call his own. He had watched friends move, watched couples sign for places with 2 incomes and 2 credit histories. He had saved, sacrificed nights out and weekends, counting each deposit like a stone in a dam. When an opportunity came to buy a property in a shared block, the price was right and the math worked, but it required trust. He was quiet by nature, methodical, private. He liked small comforts, a kettle that whistled gently at dawn, the sound of mail arriving, the little way the sunlight landed on his kitchen counter at 10 o'clock. He did not expect other people to be careless with his life. When the landlord next door knocked about insurance, the word straighta jumped off the page like ink that didn't belong. Freehold had been the promise on the listing. Freehold was the reason he'd paid that price, left that deposit, signed on the dotted line. Straighta meant rules, shared costs, limitations. Straighta explained fees he hadn't anticipated, and it explained a whole legal world his budget and his plans never accounted for. He felt a coldness then that had nothing to do with weather. A sense of being small inside a larger machine. Anger flared quick, hot, like a match, but he swallowed it. He called a lawyer. The lawyer called the agent. The agent smiled like glossy paper, and refused to accept fault. "I'm just following the listing," he said. "It's a misunderstanding. Here's $1,000, let it go." It was an insult he could not forget. Later, in mediation, the agent offered the same thin comfort, $1,000 and a handshake. Not restitution. Not accountability. A ledger entry that read payoff, move on. He had reason not to litigate. Health mattered, real, messy human limits. Some battles cost more than money. But he also had his pride, and he had a new ingredient, time. He watched the agent walk away and he did something most people rarely do. The idea was not about breaking the man. It wasn't about cruelty for the sake of it. It was about imprinting consequences. If the agent could shrug away the damage to another person's life, he would learn what it was to be watched by the thing he'd ignored, a slow, patient, public erosion. He spent nights thinking of ways to nudge the world so it would adjust itself. It had to be subtle. It had to be consistent. It had to be believable. It had to leave no fingerprints. 1,000 small pushes rather than one violent shove. On the agent's social pages, a business profile split between smiling listings and vacation photos, he found the map he needed. Men post themselves into narratives. He noted an album labeled Boys on Tour, with friendly photos, beer, sunset, a foreign shore. A week-by-week map of the man's life, a trail of small pleasures. He registered a name via a business registry, public scraps that reveal addresses and company history. The man lived in a neat house, invested in his appearance, tucked into a comfortable middle class that looked steady. He had a wife. He had clients. He had a career that moved through human trust. He wrote nothing down in permanent records. He didn't brag to friends. He didn't speak the plan aloud. His revenge was a patient instrument, secrets kept it sharp. The core of the scheme was the anniversary. Not the closing date on the property alone. Not a line in a ledger. The anniversary would be a needle that prickled every year until the fabric of the agent's private life loosened. The note would be the same, small and cryptic, about remembering and our special day, and an odd flirtation. She has your eyes. Love, L. It was petty. It was perfect. It would whisper doubt into the agent's marriage in a way the agent could not bracket cleanly as business. The words were ambiguous enough to spark curiosity, consistent enough to become a pattern for a suspicious partner to observe. He set up the first delivery on the anniversary of the sale. Flowers. A single note. Dear real estate agent, remembering you on this, our special day. She has your eyes. Love, L. Not explicit. Not obscene. Enough to be planted like a seed. Enough to watch anger sprout. Then he did nothing for months. He waited. Year 2, flowers again. Slightly different paper. A different florist. A postcard that looked like it had been sent from a city the agent had visited in his Boys on Tour album. Year 3, a letter from an international post office in a country he'd visited that summer, written in looping script. L. A phantom voice from the other side of the world. The man began to fidget when mail arrived. Year 4, a simple orchid delivered to the office, petals pale as an accusation. The note. You were with me then. I remember. The agent laughed at first in staff meetings, joking about stalkers, about the weirdness of being a public person. But patterns do what patterns do. People who live their lives in the sun, on the lawn of social attention, forget the dark. Small penetrations add up. Suspicion is corrosive. Jealousy is an acid that eats trust quietly from the inside. The agent's wife noticed. She asked questions. He flirted with dismissiveness. It's nothing. Probably someone else's mistake. His explanation fit for a time, then stopped fitting. She began to watch for the anniversary. She felt the door ajar and could not close it. The homeowner did not gloat. He catalogued receipts. He rotated florists so patterns were untraceable. He used postcards, foreign stamps, different handwriting styles. He always kept it ambiguous. He always kept it plausible. Over the years, a friend mentioned a rumor. The agent had slept with someone overseas years back. A travel fling turned messy. The man filed the rumor away. It fit into a tidy pattern that would be revealed later. He did not verify every small whisper. He only needed what he already had, the ability to point the living finger of the world. He watched as anxiety took root in the man's household. He watched the agent's walk change, shorter now, body smaller on the street. He watched a marriage that had once been steady become a list of small, awkward conversations held in the laundry room at night. The revenge was not loud. It was relentless. It was a slow erosion powered by the fact that the agent had decided other people's lives were disposable. On year 6, the agent's wife found the pattern. It was not a single letter that ruined him. It was remembering the date and the string in reverse. When she asked the wrong question at the wrong time, the agent stumbled. He tried to joke. She pushed. He answered carelessly. He said a name from a foreign trip. Her face changed then, not with theatrical fury, but with a cold calculation that is worse. What begins as small doubt can curdle into evidence when someone is willing to look. She found he had hidden messages, small gifts that made no sense. She began to inspect accounts, messages, surprising searches. She threaded through receipts, conversations, and the 1 or 2 photos he'd taken on that boys' trip he'd shown friends. A marriage built on convenient silences came apart in the quiet of the kitchen. She did not scream. She did things that were more effective. She emptied joint accounts, took the kids, and left the marital home. To her, the pattern made a case more convincing than any public accusation. It was a lived betrayal, a string of oddities into which his excuses no longer fit. The fallout moved through concrete channels quickly. When the agent's father-in-law, who happened to own the business where the agent worked, heard what had happened, thresholds shifted. Family owners respond to family risk. A son-in-law's infidelity is not just personal betrayal, it's corporate liability. Business eyes are pragmatic. He lost his job. He lost his house, owned by family interests. The eviction notices arrived, the kind of paper that rearranges life overnight. Court filings followed, and the public record filled with ugly documents, divorce filings, restraining orders, countersuits, names in columns you never want your name to appear under. The agent's career, carefully curated, unraveled on paper in a way that is slow and final. He became, in the community and in his own world, a man remembered less for his salesmanship than for the quiet collapse that followed. The homeowner heard the rumors like a distant thunderclap at first, neighbors whispering, the friend of a friend text chain. He did not celebrate. There was a complicated, human aftertaste to seeing another's life fall apart. He had not wanted the depths of ruin he learned had followed, but he also knew the alternative, a man who shrugged and let other people's lives unbalance because he could. There is no single cinematic showdown. The payoff arrives in documents, in small official stamps that carry the force of consequence, a dismissal letter, a formal eviction notice, a custody affidavit. Picture a man, once a polished presence in meetings, standing in a bare living room as movers take his things to a truck. Picture his face as the reality that had always been abstract. The effects of his choices, is delivered in boxes with tape. That sight is the human climax, not a scream, not blood, but the dull, precise rearrangement of life. There was, the homeowner later learned, a physical confrontation, an ugly moment when the betrayed husband returned to the house, words were exchanged, a nose was broken. There were police reports. There were late-night calls and the unpleasant exposure of private fights filed into public records. But the greatest scene was quieter. The agent, whose life had been built on gloss and charm, finding himself scrubbed from public life. He left the state. His online presence thinned to absence. The friend network that had applauded his deals grew silent. What was left was the echo of decisions, a man accountable to the sum of his choices. For the homeowner, the release was not triumph in the classic sense. It was a recalibration. He had regained a sense of moral economy. When people break trust, things can move to correct the imbalance. Accountability is rarely pretty. It is often slow, procedural, and inconvenient for everyone involved. But in the end, for him, it meant his children would not inherit the same hidden chaos his childhood had borne. Years later, the homeowner's life matured into a rhythm of essayed normality. He still kept the kettle that whistled. The mailbox still leaned. But the wariness that follows betrayal softened into vigilance. He had created a boundary, a practical one, and taught his children, by example, what it looks like to stand for your life without destroying others for sport. He did not revel in a man's misfortune. When he learned how far the ripple effects had gone, jobless, evicted, in court, he felt complicated remorse. He had set the dominoes in motion, but he had not intended serial destruction. He wanted restitution, not revenge that consumed more than was needed, and there is the lesson that sits on the table like a cup of tea. Patience is a weapon and karma is a method more than a myth. Some people believe in immediate retribution, a public reveal, a scream in the street. He believed in the slow unfolding of consequence. That is a cooler flame, and sometimes cruelty answered with measured consequence is the most effective form of justice left to people who cannot, or will not, take more violent turn. He would say now, if asked, that the agent's fall was an uncomfortable but necessary correction. He is not gloating. He is wary. He is a father who kept his children's lives above the passions that once ruined his own. If this story gave you chills, click like and subscribe. Would you have played the long game? Or would you have confronted the agent head-on? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'll read the most thoughtful replies. If you want this expanded into scene-by-scene production notes, camera angles, SFX cues, flower delivery, mailbox, courtroom stamp, moving truck, and a shorts-ready 60-second teaser, tell me which scene to expand and I'll draft it into a full production blueprint. Thanks for listening. Patience, sometimes, is the quietest kind of justice. The office lights buzzed softly above as Ethan sat at his desk, watching the loading bar on his computer crawl forward. He had spent the last 3 weeks crafting the university's biggest marketing campaign of the year, a full video series that showcased the new arts building, student stories, and the dean's message. He had filmed, edited, and rewritten scripts on weekends, unpaid overtime, just to make it perfect. And yet behind him stood the one person determined to make his life miserable, Amanda, his new boss. She was the kind of woman who smiled when others stumbled, the type who loved control more than results. Since the day she replaced Ethan's old supervisor, she had done nothing but nitpick. Your tone's too casual. This isn't professional enough. Maybe if you smoke less you'd finish faster. She said it in front of everyone, and she always said it loud enough for others to hear. Ethan clenched his jaw but stayed quiet. He had learned that silence sometimes said more than anger ever could. A week before the project's final presentation, Amanda stormed into the editing room. "Where's the final cut?" she snapped. Ethan looked up, exhausted. "I'm still syncing the B-roll from yesterday. You told me to redo." She cut him off. "Excuses? You've been given too much freedom, Ethan. Maybe this job isn't for you." The room went silent. The intern stared, pretending to work. That's when she said it, the line that would start everything. "Maybe we need someone who doesn't take smoke breaks every 2 hours." Ethan froze. He didn't smoke during work hours, he only stepped out during lunch. But Amanda didn't care about facts. She wanted a reason to get rid of him. By Friday, the HR email arrived. "Your position has been terminated effective immediately." Most people would have cried or yelled. Ethan didn't. He just sat there, staring at the HR message, feeling a strange calm wash over him. Because he knew something Amanda didn't. The marketing files, scripts, and raw footage, all of it, were still under his personal creative license. He had used his own camera, his own editing software, and his own creative rights. The university had never signed over the ownership. He smiled. For once, his silence had paid off. A month later, Amanda presented the marketing project to the university board. It was supposed to be her big win, proof that she could handle the department. But when she opened the project files, everything was missing. The footage, the color grading, the synced audio. All replaced with a single black screen that read, "This content has been removed due to copyright ownership. Contact Ethan Reynolds for licensing." The boardroom went quiet. Ethan didn't have to be there to imagine Amanda's face turning pale. The university panicked. The launch was in 3 days. The dean himself called Ethan. "Son, we're in a mess here. We need that footage. What will it take?" Ethan was polite. Calm. Professional. "I'll license it back for a fair rate. Standard freelance payment for the full project, 1 year's salary equivalent. Silence. Then, a resigned sigh. Done. Ethan transferred the files. The university paid. The launch was saved. But Amanda? She wasn't. Within weeks, an internal review began. The board discovered that she'd approved an unsanctioned termination and lost thousands in damages. Her contract was terminated. No appeal. No fanfare. Just a quiet walk out of the same office where she once humiliated Ethan. Months later, Ethan sat at his own desk, this time in a creative agency that valued him. He watched the university's new commercial on YouTube, the same one he made. It had over 1 million views. He chuckled softly, sipping his coffee. In the comments, students praised the editing, the pacing, the story. Not one mention of Amanda. Justice had been poetic, and paid in full. Headphone narrator outro, for voiceover. She fired him thinking she could break his spirit. But instead, she handed him the keys to her downfall. Because when you mistreat good people, karma doesn't rush, it waits for the perfect moment to strike. And when it does, it hits where it hurts the most.